Okay, so you guys have sent in some really fascinating stuff for us to dive into this time, all centered around this idea of solipsism.
Yeah.
Solipsism, right?
Right.
Which, for anyone who's maybe not familiar,
Yeah.
essentially it's this philosophical idea
Yeah.
that the only thing that you can be absolutely sure of
Yeah.
is the existence of your own mind.
Right.
Like literally everything else. So this conversation that we're having right now,
Yeah.
the world outside, the sun, the moon, the stars,
Mm-hmm.
it might not actually have any reality independent of your own consciousness.
And I think that's what makes this idea so intriguing
It's a huge one.
and so potentially unsettling for a lot of people.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, if you really start to think about it,
Yeah,
it can kind of send you down this rabbit hole of like, whoa, wait a minute.
that
Like,
can be a bit of a head trip.
how do I know anything for sure?
Yeah.
And, just going through the material that you sent over, it's clear that even within solipsism,
Right.
there are different sort of gradations or flavors of this idea.
That's actually a really good point because I think one of the mistakes that people might make is assuming that solipsism is just this one kind of monolithic thing.
Right.
And it's not.
It's not at all. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you've got on the one hand, like the really hardcore version, which is sometimes called metaphysical solipsism.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you're basically saying that your mind is the only reality that truly exists.
Right. Like the Matrix almost.
Kind of, yeah, except you're the one generating the matrix, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got what's sometimes called epistemological solipsism.
Right.
And that's a little bit less intense.
A bit more cautious.
Yeah, it's more about acknowledging that, okay, maybe there is an external world out there,
Yeah.
but we can't actually ever be truly certain of anything beyond our own perceptions.
Yeah.
Like we're trapped within our own subjective experiences.
Exactly.
And then you've got this other interesting category, which is sometimes called methodological solipsism.
Yeah.
And that's not so much about denying the external world.
Right.
It's more about saying, well, if we want to build any kind of reliable knowledge,
Yeah.
we have to start with our own direct experiences
Yeah.
as the foundation.
Right.
So it's kind of like a framework for how to approach knowledge.
Yeah. Exactly.
Rather than like a definitive statement about what is or isn't real.
And I think that's an important distinction
Yeah, for sure.
because it helps us understand that engaging with solipsism doesn't necessarily mean embracing this extreme view that nothing exists outside of our minds.
Right, exactly.
It can also be a way to approach questions about knowledge and reality from a very particular starting point.
Yeah, so really what we're trying to do in this deep dive
Right.
is not to definitively answer the question of whether or not solipsism is true.
Right, because how could you ever really prove or disprove that?
Yeah, like that's the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
It's like this ultimate unprovable kind of conundrum.
Yeah.
So instead, what we're interested in is kind of exploring, well, what can we learn from these ideas?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are the potential benefits
Yeah.
of engaging with solipsistic thought?
Yeah.
But also, what are the potential risks?
Mm.
Like, where could this kind of thinking lead us astray?
Exactly. It's all about finding that balance, right?
Yeah,
So let's start by looking at some of the potential benefits because they really are there.
for sure.
And one of the big ones that the sources consistently highlight is this idea of introspection and self-reflection.
Yeah.
Like if you really start to take seriously this notion that your experience is fundamentally your own,
Right.
that it's kind of the bedrock of your reality,
Yeah.
it can actually be a really powerful tool for kind of stripping away all those external influences.
That noise.
Right, all the noise.
Yeah.
And getting down to the core of what you truly value and what really motivates you.
I mean, isn't that what a lot of like spiritual practices are kind of trying to get at in a way?
Totally, yeah.
Like that process of kind of quieting the mind so you can hear that inner voice more clearly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And solipsism kind of takes it to this extreme,
Right.
but it can actually be a helpful way of framing that process.
Yeah, it's like almost like a thought experiment, right?
Exactly.
Where you're saying, okay, what if everything else was just an illusion?
Yeah.
And all that really mattered was my own internal experience.
Yeah.
What would I focus on then?
What would be truly important to me?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
And the answers you come up with can be pretty profound.
For sure.
And beyond that introspective benefit,
Yeah.
there's also the sheer intellectual stimulation of grappling with these questions about reality and perception.
Yeah, it's like a mental workout, right?
Totally.
Like you're really flexing those critical thinking muscles.
Yeah. And it forces you to question assumptions that you might not even realize you're making.
It's like you're taking your everyday understanding of the world
Mm-hmm.
and you're kind of holding it up to the light. And you're saying, wait a minute, like how much of this is actually based on solid ground?
Yeah.
And how much of it is just kind of what I've always taken for granted?
And that's such a valuable exercise in itself.
It is, yeah.
Because it makes us more aware of how we're constructing our own reality.
Right.
And how much of it is actually based on, things that we can't actually prove.
Yeah, it's really humbling in a way.
It is, yeah.
It's like it reminds you that there are limits to our knowledge
Mm.
and that we shouldn't be too quick to assume that we have everything figured out.
But what I find really interesting is that beyond those kind of intellectual and self-reflective benefits,
Yeah.
the sources also point to a potential psychological benefit,
Oh, really?
which might seem counterintuitive at first.
Okay.
But it's this idea that engaging with solipsistic thought
Okay.
can actually offer a form of comfort.
Comfort, yeah.
That's not what I would have expected.
Particularly for individuals who might be struggling with feelings of loneliness or existential anxiety. Okay, so how does that work?
Well, the idea is that by focusing on the certainty of your own mind,
Right.
by making that the anchor of your reality,
Yeah.
you can actually create a sense of stability
Right.
in a world that might otherwise feel chaotic and overwhelming.
Okay, so it's kind of like you're creating a safe space
Exactly.
in your own mind
Yeah,
where you have control
right.
and where the uncertainty of the external world doesn't have as much power over you.
Absolutely.
That's really interesting.
And it's not to say that this is like a cure-all or
Well-
that it's necessarily healthy to completely withdraw from the world.
Right.
But for some people, it can be a coping mechanism,
Yeah.
a way of managing those really difficult feelings of existential angst.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And, I think another point that the sources make, which is interesting, is that this focus on subjective experience isn't just limited to, like, philosophy.
Right.
It actually shows up in all sorts of different fields.
Yeah, it's all over the place.
Like, think about psychology,
Mm.
right? Like, understanding someone's unique internal landscape
Yeah.
is essential for therapy,
Absolutely.
for helping them to heal.
And for understanding their behavior,
Exactly.
why they do the things they do.
And then you've got literature and art,
Yeah.
which are all about conveying a particular perspective.
Right. A singular vision of the world.
Yeah, like
Wow.
even when you're trying to be objective
Yeah.
as a writer or an artist,
Mhm.
you're still inevitably filtering everything through your own lens.
Your own subjective experience.
Exactly.
So yeah, I think that's a really key takeaway.
Yeah.
Is that this focus on the individual perspective is actually much more widespread
Right.
than we might initially think.
And I think it's also important to remember that the way we experience art
Yeah.
is always subjective.
Right.
Like a
Yeah.
painting might evoke completely different emotions in different people
Mm-hmm.
based on their own personal history,
Absolutely.
their own memories, their own associations.
It's all relative.
Yeah. And I think solipsism kind of highlights that.
Yeah, it forces us to acknowledge that there's no single objective truth
Yeah.
when it comes to things like beauty or meaning.
And that actually leads us quite nicely into some of the potential harms.
Right.
Because like we were saying earlier,
Yeah.
it's important to have a balanced view.
Right. There's always two sides to the coin.
Exactly. So what are some of the potential downsides here?
Well, I think one of the biggest risks with solipsism
Yeah.
is that it can lead to social isolation.
Right.
If you start to really believe that your own mind is the only thing that's certain
Right.
and that you can never truly know what's going on in anyone else's head,
Yeah.
it can become really difficult to connect with people.
To empathize.
Yeah, empathy becomes a real challenge.
Because if you don't even know if other minds exist,
Right.
how can you truly relate to them?
Exactly.
And that can obviously have a huge impact on your relationships.
Yeah, it can make it really hard to maintain meaningful connections.
And, it's not just about interpersonal relationships.
Right.
It can also affect your ability to function in society.
Mm.
Like if you don't trust that other people's experiences are valid,
Right.
you're not going to be able to collaborate effectively.
You're not going to be able to work together towards common goals.
Right.
And that can have all sorts of negative consequences.
And I think another potential danger that the sources highlight is narcissism.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Because if you really start to believe that your own thoughts and feelings
Right.
are the only ones that truly matter,
Yeah.
it can create this sense of inflated self-importance
Mm.
and a lack of consideration for others,
Right.
which obviously isn't great for anyone.
It can lead to all sorts of conflicts and misunderstanding.
And I think it's important to remember that this isn't just about like being selfish or egotistical.
Right.
It's about a fundamental inability to see the world from anyone else's perspective,
Exactly.
which is really at the heart of what makes us human.
It's that ability to connect with others,
To understand their experiences.
to share their joys and their sorrows.
And to care about their well-being.
Yeah, so I think that's a really important point.
Yeah, it is.
Is that solipsism, taken to an extreme,
Yeah.
can actually undermine those very qualities that make us social creatures.
Right.
That allow us to form bonds with one another.
Okay, so we've talked about some of the potential benefits.
Yeah.
And some of the potential harms.
Yes.
Of engaging with solipsistic thought. And I think one thing that's become really clear.
Yeah.
Is that it's a complex issue.
It's not a simple black and white kind of thing.
Exactly.
There are nuances.
Yeah.
And there are shades of gray.
Absolutely.
So now I want to shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
And talk about why this seemingly abstract philosophical concept might actually be relevant to you, like, in the world today.
Yeah.
Because the sources that we've been looking at have actually brought up some really interesting connections to our modern experiences. I think one of the most striking things is how certain aspects of modern life can almost unintentionally mirror or amplify solipsistic feelings.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Like, think about the digital age and virtual reality.
Yeah, good point.
Our social interactions are increasingly happening through screens.
Yeah, for sure.
And in these immersive virtual environments,
the
lines between our own perceptions and these simulated realities can become increasingly blurred.
It's like you're creating your own little world.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can curate it to be exactly how you want it to be.
And so in a way, it's not that everyone online is a solipsist.
Right.
But it does create this context where that feeling of being primarily connected to your own curated experience can be heightened.
Yeah, I mean, even just something as simple as scrolling through your social media feed.
Yeah.
It's all tailored to your interests.
Exactly.
To your preferences.
You're seeing what the algorithms think you want to see.
Yeah, so it's like you're constantly being reinforced in your own little bubble.
Right.
And it can be really easy to lose sight of the fact that there's a whole world out there.
That's very different from what you're experiencing.
Yeah, and it might not be as curated as your online world.
And then there's also the connection to mental health.
Okay, yeah.
Which the sources touch on as well.
Right.
And this is particularly relevant given the rising rates of anxiety and depression
You're sure?
that we're seeing globally.
Yeah, it's a huge issue.
And the idea here is that when you're struggling with these conditions, your focus naturally becomes more inward.
Yeah.
You're consumed by your own worries, your own anxieties, your own pain.
It's like your internal world just takes over.
Exactly.
And the external world can start to feel distant.
And less real.
Yeah, and that's not to say that everyone who experiences anxiety or depression is a solipsist.
Right.
But it does illustrate how these conditions
can amplify that focus on internal experience.
It's like a kind of unintentional solipsism.
Right, where your own mental state becomes the primary reality.
Yeah, and it can be really hard to break out of that cycle.
Absolutely.
Especially when you're feeling isolated and alone.
And what's important to remember is that solipsism isn't just this historical philosophical idea.
Right.
It's still very much alive in contemporary debates.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Particularly in discussions about consciousness. Like, what is consciousness?
Yeah.
How does it arise?
Right.
What's the relationship between consciousness and the physical world?
Huge questions.
Like, huge questions.
And then you've got the whole debate about the nature of reality.
Right, like, what is reality anyway?
Especially in an age of increasingly complex scientific discoveries.
Where we're constantly pushing the boundaries of what we thought we knew.
Exactly.
So yeah, solipsism might seem like this kind of obscure philosophical concept, but it's actually deeply intertwined with some of the most pressing questions that we're grappling with today.
And you can't really talk about modern life.
Right.
Without talking about social media.
Yeah, it's such a dominant force.
And the way that it shapes our self-perception, our relationships.
Our understanding of the world.
Yeah. And I think the sources that we've been looking at have raised some really interesting points about how social media might actually be reinforcing solipsistic tendencies.
Yeah, in a subtle but powerful way.
Like, think about the way that we construct our online identities.
Right.
It's all about curating this perfect image of ourselves.
The highlights reel.
Yeah, exactly.
It's all about presenting ourselves in the best possible light.
And while that's not necessarily a bad thing,
right,
it can create this pressure to constantly be performing, to be presenting this idealized version of ourselves.
And it can also lead to this kind of obsessive self-focus.
Yeah, where we're constantly comparing ourselves to others.
Trying to keep up with the Joneses.
Yeah, and that can be really damaging to our self-esteem.
And to our mental health.
So I think it's important to be aware of those dynamics.
Yeah.
And to make sure that we're using social media in a way that's healthy.
That's enriching our lives.
Rather than detracting from them.
And connecting us with others.
Rather than isolating us.
Exactly.
And it's not just social media.
Right.
The sources also touch on broader cultural trends that might be aligning with solipsistic themes.
Like the emphasis on individual experience.
Right.
And the questioning of grand narratives.
Which is kind of like the hallmark of postmodernism.
Exactly.
Yeah, and while postmodernism isn't the same as solipsism,
right,
there are some interesting parallels.
Definitely.
Like this focus on personal truths and the idea that there might not be any one objective reality.
That we can all agree on.
Right.
Which I think is really relevant to the conversation we're having today.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it shows how these ideas about the self and the nature of reality
be constantly evolving.
And they're being shaped by all sorts of different forces.
So as we kind of start to wrap up this deep dive, what's the main takeaway here? Like, what do we want people to walk away with?
I think the key message is that solipsism is much more than just an abstract philosophical concept.
Right.
It actually raises some incredibly relevant questions about how we understand ourselves.
And our place in the world.
And how we relate to others.
Exactly.
And I think what the sources really highlight is the need for balance.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
On the one hand,
the
introspection and self-awareness that solipsistic ideas can spark are incredibly valuable.
Yeah, like we were saying earlier, it's like a mental workout.
Exactly.
It helps you to strengthen those critical thinking muscles.
And to really understand your own internal landscape.
But on the other hand, we have to be careful not to let those ideas lead us into isolation and detachment.
Because ultimately, we're social creatures.
We need connection.
We thrive on connection.
And we need to acknowledge and engage with the external world.
If we want to live fulfilling lives.
Absolutely.
So I think finding that balance between understanding your own unique inner world and connecting with the experiences of others
is really the key here.
It's the sweet spot.
Yeah, it is.
And I think it's something that we all need to be mindful of.
Especially in today's world.
Where the focus on the individual can sometimes be overwhelming.
So here's a final thought for you to kind of chew on as you go about your day. In a world that increasingly seems to emphasize the individual. Through technology, through social media, through this kind of constant focus on personal narratives. How do you navigate that balance?
Yeah, how do you do it?
How do you make sure that you're honoring your own unique experience? While also recognizing the validity and the importance of the experiences of everyone around you?
It's a tough question.
It is,
But it's one that we all need to be asking ourselves.
It's a good one.
And I think the more we reflect on it, the better equipped we'll be. To navigate the complexities of modern life.
And to create a world that's more connected.
More compassionate.
And more fulfilling for everyone.
Absolutely.
Food for thought.
Food for thought,
All right, well, that's about all the time we have for today.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into solipsism.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating conversation.
It has. And until next time, keep those minds curious.
And keep exploring those big questions.